Beyond the stone walls of Glencairn Hollow, where the wind always seems to be stirring, and even the heather tilts toward the sea, I encountered a scene I couldn't quite understand. A lone falcon, whom I had named Bran years ago, flew above the cliffs with a haunting grace that tugged at the heart. He had lost his chicks to an unexpected storm a week earlier. At that moment, I was still grappling with my own feelings of loss when I came across Thimble, a tiny, trembling kitten huddled near a broken fence. Little did I know, both of them were on their own journeys of survival, and perhaps they didn't need rescuing in the way I initially thought. On that foggy morning, the low sky seemed to wrap around the cliffs, making them groan in what felt like ancient sorrow. I was there with my camera, watching Bran's flight. He hadn't returned to his nesting spot in days. His mate was gone, and the remains of the two chicks had been discovered by Aisling after the storm. There was Bran, circling endlessly, almost as if he believed he could still find what he had lost. I hadn't anticipated finding life below. Tucked in a fragment of broken fence and sheltered by a thorny gorse bush was a small, soaking bundle of fur, too weak to meow, just taking rapid, shallow breaths. One of her front paws appeared bent, and her gaze met mine, conveying a sense of urgency, as if she knew time was short. Surprisingly, she didn't shy away when I reached out. Instead, she remained still. I instinctively wrapped her in my scarf, not really considering the next steps, just reacting based on feeling. Bran's decision to follow me home caught me off guard. At first, I thought it was merely coincidence. He circled the cottage later that day, perching on the oak tree near the barn roof as if he were keeping watch. But once I brought the kitten inside and set her down by the fire, he lingered. Long after night fell, his eyes remained fixed on the window, quiet and attentive. I tried to convince myself not to read too much into it. However, a part of me had already formed a bond. The initial days were filled with a mix of worry and uncertainty. Thimble, as Aisling had called her for her small size, wouldn't eat unless the milk was warm just so. At night, she would cry out in her sleep, as though she were falling. Her paw was swollen and probably broken, but the vet mentioned it could heal on its own if she remained still. That turned out to be quite a challenge, particularly when the world outside our window was so lively. Bran became a regular visitor each morning, returning like clockwork to perch on the oak tree near the house. He didn't hunt. He didn't say a word. He just observed. I had this nagging feeling that he was waiting for something, though I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. Aisling suggested I was overthinking things, saying that grief affects how we see the world around us. But then there was Ewan, who had started coming by to help with feeding Thimble. He believed differently. "She's not scared of him," he whispered one day, crouching by the window. "She watches him like she understands." And he was right. Thimble had begun to crawl toward the windowsill whenever he showed up, pressing her little face against the glass, her eyes wide and her tail flicking back and forth. She didn't behave this way for anyone else, not for the fire, and certainly not for me. That's when we hit a snag. Aisling feared that the falcon might be a threat. "Predators are still predators," she reminded me. But I wasn't so sure about that. I had seen animals go through loss before. Bran wasn't hunting, he was grieving, just like I was. On the fifth morning, the mist was thicker than usual, wrapping the valley in a soft blanket of grays and silvery blues. It felt like one of those mornings where sounds seem to slow down, and every movement is softened by the stillness. I'd left the back door slightly ajar, not wide open, just enough to let the air drift in, convincing myself it was for some fresh air. But deep down I knew it was something more, a gentle invitation, maybe. I had noticed Bran coming closer day by day. His flights were no longer just circles in the sky. Now he was making careful swoops near the barn, as if he were testing the limits of our shared space. I was surprised by how much I looked forward to that flash of wings. His presence somehow eased the silence within me. I went into the kitchen to warm Thimble's formula, the movements almost soothing by now. When I came back, barely a minute later, the atmosphere inside the cottage had shifted. It didn't feel colder or warmer. It felt heavier, like something old had just crept through the door without anyone noticing. The gap I had left in the door had widened a little more than I remembered. At first, I thought the wind might have nudged it, but then I saw him. Bran was inside. He sat on the windowsill, his talons gripping the edge like roots digging into stone. The light from the fire caught his feathers, revealing a shift of colors from slate to charcoal to hints of rust. Thimble was just a few feet away, small and delicate, still more fluff than fur. She looked up at me with wide, glassy eyes that seemed wiser than her age suggested. Neither of us moved. The only sounds were the soft crackle of the fire and my heartbeat echoing in my ears. I stood still, not out of fear but awe, caught in a moment that felt larger than words could express. I could have grabbed my camera from the table nearby, but I chose not to. Some moments are too special to capture digitally. They deserve to be kept in our memories, untouched and unedited. Then, without warning, Bran glided down from the sill. He descended smoothly, without a flap or a sound, landing on the floor just a few inches away from Thimble. Instead of backing away, the kitten took a tentative step forward, her little paw dragging across the rug with determination. She didn't hesitate or pause to assess the situation. She moved as if she recognized him. Bran, this magnificent bird I'd seen hunt and cry in sorrowful calls, did something unexpected. He tilted his head and lowered it slowly, letting out a soft chirp. It was gentle and rhythmic, something I had only heard when falcons cared for their young. It wasn't a call of warning, hunger, or alarm. It was something deeply tender. It felt like a sound born not from instinct, but from a place of connection and shared understanding. I stayed rooted in place, afraid to move and disrupt this remarkable scene. The outside world could have been in chaos, and I wouldn't have noticed. When they finally broke their connection, if you could even call it that, Bran turned away, beat his wings once, and faded back into the mist beyond the trees. I didn't share this experience with Aisling or Ewan. I worried they might overanalyze it, explaining away this incredible moment with terms like imprinting or behavioral displacement. But deep down, I knew what I had seen and understood its meaning. Sometimes, even after something is lost, it can reach out for recognition, and something just as broken might respond in kind. The days that followed felt dreamlike and elusive. They weren't the comforting kind of dreams, but rather the ones that linger in your mind, leaving you uncertain about their message. Bran showed up every morning, always keeping his distance, but never truly gone. He would perch on the gnarled oak tree or the ledge above the barn, his gaze fixed on the cottage, almost as if he were protecting something precious. Thimble began to notice him too, reacting in ways that surprised even Aisling. She became more aware of her surroundings, her little body leaning toward the light whenever Bran's shadow passed the window. One day, Aisling voiced her concerns while she cradled Thimble in her arms, carefully adjusting the soft splint on her injured paw. Her tone was practical, but there was a hint of worry hidden underneath. "He's a falcon, Callum, a predator. I know you want to see something deeper here, but that's not how nature works." Though her words weren't unkind, they felt like a line that she drew firmly. It was a boundary I wasn't ready to accept. Ewan, however, was captivated by the whole scene. He started sketching Bran and Thimble together, soft pencil drawings that captured Bran's impressive wings hovering protectively above Thimble's small frame, each page filled with wide-eyed wonder. "Maybe he thinks she's his chick," he pondered one afternoon while we observed Bran settle in, unmoving despite the swaying branches. "Or maybe she's the only one who knows how to listen." I wanted to laugh at how poetic his thoughts were, but held back. Ewan, with his innocent perspective, had touched on something we adults were often too guarded to acknowledge. Sometimes, nature's rules seem to bend. Sometimes, grief reshapes instinct, and love, whatever form it takes, finds a way to seep through the cracks. Yet there was still an undercurrent of tension. Aisling insisted we build barriers by the back door and keep the window closed whenever Thimble was outside her crate. "It's just a matter of time before his instincts take over, regardless of this unusual behavior," she warned. But I sensed Bran's actions were more than instinctual. They felt like a conscious choice, intentional, measured, and oddly reassuring. And there I stood amidst it all, caught in the quiet uncertainty of whether I was witnessing something miraculous or merely deluding myself in my solitude. I had lost Moira the year before, and her absence echoed in every small noise and memory of the heathered hills we once explored together. Perhaps I was projecting too much onto Bran because I wanted to believe. But that didn't make the connection any less genuine. Every day felt like a game of patience, as if we were holding our breath, unsure of who would make the first move. But neither of them did, at least not yet. Then, in the second week, the outside world began to seep into our quiet routine. Word traveled slowly at first, a whisper moving from Tavish to the postman, and then from there to the local bakery in Kinlochmar. The Falcon Man, they called me. It wasn't meant to be unkind, but there was always a hint of doubt in their voices, directed at someone who lived so close to the wild. Someone must have spotted Bran circling our cottage or overheard Ewan chatting in town. Either way, my story was no longer just mine. People started to visit, not in droves, but enough to notice a change. Hikers began wandering off the trails, eager for a glimpse. A retired teacher from Fort William appeared with a camera and a barrage of questions. One woman even asked if she could bless the kitten with crystals, which might have been amusing if Thimble hadn't been shaking in my arms. Eiling was annoyed. "You have to manage this," she whispered after the second visitor knocked on our door, camera ready. "This is something delicate, not a show for everyone." She had a point. I had tried to keep our lives private, but the story had gained traction. Grieving Falcon bonds with orphaned Kitten was too compelling to ignore. I began to close the curtains more often and locked the back door, allowing Thimble near the window only when Bran arrived at dawn. But the visitors kept coming, along with questions I wasn't prepared to answer. That weekend, the weather took a turn. Strong winds swept down from the ridgeline, bending trees like soft reeds. I noticed that Bran had stopped calling. He still showed up every morning, still perched nearby, still watching, but he was silent now, as if anticipating something beyond our understanding. Meanwhile, Thimble curled up against the wall beneath the window, her fragile paw resting, but her spirit remained strong. Each time Bran disappeared into the mist, she would cry out, not in pain, but in longing. Then the sanctuary called. A barn owl had been found near the edge of the hollow, injured and disoriented, likely displaced by the same storm that had taken away Bran's nest. Eiling thought it would be a good idea for me to take it in, as I had the space to provide temporary care. "We're stretched thin," she said, but her eyes revealed more. Maybe it was time for me to shift my focus, to let go of the difficult situation I was trying to manage. Yet I found it hard to agree. How could I bring another troubled soul into a home already balancing between sadness and hope? I began to wonder if I was becoming more than just naive. Was I, in my efforts to fix what couldn't be fixed, holding everyone back? Bran didn't have a place to call home. Thimble lacked a mother to care for her. And me? I was attempting to piece together a family from fragments. But what if my attempts were what was causing everything to unravel? I hadn't intended to become part of their journey. I always thought my role was to observe, to capture the wild, beautiful moments from a respectful distance. Photography had helped me feel close without getting involved. Somewhere along the way, though, I crossed a line and now I felt lost, unable to return. Thimble was getting stronger, but she still had a long way to go. Her paw was stiff, and though the swelling had reduced, she moved with a certain awkwardness, making even the smallest leap seem monumental. Yet there was a change in her spirit. She seemed more alive, more aware, and always searching for Bran. Whenever he was near, her whole body leaned toward him, ears perked and tail moving in slow arcs, as if they spoke a language only they understood. I began to think of myself not as her protector, but as a bridge, a temporary link. This realization gnawed at me during quiet nights when the fire flickered low and the valley outside faded into darkness. Eiling noticed this change too. She stopped pushing me the way she once did, but she looked at me differently. It was as if she was trying to figure out where I ended and where this unique, patched-together family began. "You do know you can't keep them both," she said gently one evening while packing her things. "Neither one really belongs to you." I understood her point. I really did. I knew it as well as I knew my own breath. But simply knowing didn't ease the reality. Deep down, I was reluctant to let either of them go. Not Bran, with his quiet pain. Not Thimble, with her longing for connection. They had entered my life like echoes of something I thought I'd lost forever. Companionship, purpose, and the chance for healing. The question lingered in my mind. Did I truly love them enough to let them go, or was my fear of loss holding me back? It all started with an unsettling silence. It wasn't the gradual quiet of evening. It felt abrupt, like a heavy curtain falling. That morning, Bran didn't arrive. There were no wings sweeping across the oak trees, no steady watch from the barn roof. Instead, an empty sky loomed overhead, creating a tense stillness, reminiscent of the moments before a storm, even without any clouds. At first, I wondered if it was the weather. Perhaps he had wandered inland, or the winds had shifted his hunting grounds. Yet, when a second morning passed without a sign of him, and Thimble refused to eat or even leave her spot by the back window, anxiety started creeping back in. It was that familiar, helpless fear that had trailed me through hospital corridors and somber funeral homes. A type of fear that doesn't respond to logic. It knows only the sting of absence. By the third morning, Ewan arrived early, his cheeks rosy from the cold and his hair damp from the dew. "There's a man on the lower trail," he said, catching his breath. "He has traps, metal ones, not the usual." The urgency in his voice told me this was serious. I slipped on my coat before the kettle had boiled. We found the man half a mile from the ridge, setting traps near the outcropping where Bran had once made his home. I recognized him, a sheep farmer from the next glen, notorious for his obsession with predators. "There have been kills," he stated flatly as he worked quickly. "A fox, maybe a hawk, something's been taking the lambs." I argued that Bran posed no threat, insisting falcons don't target lambs. But he looked at me with the disbelief reserved for those deemed irrational. "Do you think he knows that?" he replied, nodding at the sky. "A bird's a bird." That night I struggled to sleep. Sitting on the kitchen floor beside Thimble's crate, my hand rested on the gentle rise and fall of her side. Since Bran's disappearance, she had grown quieter, but not in a way that suggested healing. It felt different, as though she was saving her energy for someone who might not return. While I tried to convince myself he would be back, part of me was already starting to mourn. What none of us saw coming, what I certainly wasn't ready for, was that the next morning, Thimble was gone. The window had been left slightly open, just enough for a bit of fresh air. Although the crate was still latched shut, the side panel that Ewan had fixed last week had come loose. I noticed a paw print on the sill and a faint scuff on the cabinet. There were no signs of blood or feathers, just emptiness. Without a second thought, I dashed across the fields. My boots soaked through. I shouted her name, only for the wind to carry it away. I climbed the ridge where Bran used to sit, scanning the tree line, the valley, and the high cliffs beyond the sheep pens. There was nothing, just that oppressive silence that seemed to grow louder and more punishing. For the first time in this strange situation, I felt everything start to come apart. The hardest part was not knowing if I'd lost one of them, or both. The morning after Thimble disappeared, the valley felt cold and unwelcoming. The mist that used to feel comforting now hung on the trees like thick smoke, heavy and lifeless. Even the birds, which typically filled the air with song after a long night, were silent. That stillness felt like an accusation. I searched from dawn until dusk, looking in every dry ditch and fallen log, checking any burrow where a scared kitten might hide. Ewan accompanied me until he could walk no more, and Aisling even left her everyday practice early, her usual calm replaced by a tense quiet that hinted at her own worries. There was no sign, no paw prints, no tufts of fur. The cottage that once buzzed with energy now felt eerily clean, almost sterile. Still, I kept the window open, hoping it might bring her back. I began placing small bowls, one inside and another near the oak tree outside, hoping to create a path for her if she was still close by. Bran hadn't returned either. His absence felt sharper now, as if a thread holding everything together had snapped. Ewan was the first to voice what we were both thinking, kneeling on the porch with an untouched mug of tea in hand. What if they went to find each other? I wanted to brush it off, to steer us back to something sensible and grounded. But the question lingered, resonating with a fear I hadn't yet faced. What if their bond was stronger than the one they shared with me? The quiet days blurred together after that. I stopped taking photos. The camera felt too cold in my hands, too distant. Aisling continued to stop by, always pretending she was checking on me instead of what had happened. We talked less about the past and more about simple things, like the weather, the fox prints near the sheep pens, and how the owl had finally settled in at the sanctuary. Yet somehow, our conversations would often fall silent, as if our words were hesitant to approach the pain that lingered beneath the surface. One evening, Tavish visited, which was unusual since he rarely left his croft unless it was important. "I saw something," he said, nodding toward the cliffs while standing in my doorway, rain dripping from his well-worn cap. "Looked like a falcon, not flying well, circling low, might have something in its talons." My heart tightened, not with hope, not yet, but with a sense of urgency that demanded belief despite not seeing proof. The next morning, just as dawn was breaking, I decided to climb the ridge alone. The sky was transforming into a soft gold hue, and the wind returned, tugging at my coat and seemingly at the very edges of reality. And then there it was. A flicker of movement, a shape too small to be Bran, yet too intentional to be just the wind. I heard a sound. It was soft, almost unnoticed. Not a cry, not a call, a chirr. I took off running. I found them in a hollow beneath the western ridge, where the cliffs embraced each other as if to protect something delicate. The ascent was challenging, ankle-deep in damp heather and slick with mud from the recent storms, but I hardly noticed as I reached the crest and caught sight of a figure in the gorse below. Initially, I thought it was Bran, his outline stark against the pale stone, wings folded, head lowered, but then I noticed a gray flicker at his talons. It wasn't prey or remnants of a meal. It was Thimble, thin, dirty, limping, yet alive. She lay curled up between Bran's feet, like a chick nestled in a nest formed not of twigs but of attention and care. Bran, a fierce guardian of the sky, remained still, watching and protecting, not as a hunter but as a father. My breath hitched, not because of the surprise of finding them, but from understanding what I was stumbling upon. A connection I could barely comprehend, and one I wasn't sure I had the right to reclaim. I stepped forward slowly, calling her name softly at first, then louder as she lifted her head, blinked at me, and let out a shaky mewl. She attempted to stand, her paw dragging uselessly behind her. Bran stayed where he was, unwavering. He turned his head slightly, meeting my gaze with an expression that was hard to read, not threatening or fearful, but something deeper, almost like sadness. It felt like an understanding, and perhaps even trust. I knelt down, arms open, calling out her name as my voice caught. Thimble took a few hesitant steps toward me but paused to look back, uncertainty in her eyes. One heartbeat passed, then another. And in that moment, she made her choice. She stumbled forward, collapsing into my embrace, as if she was finally allowing herself to rest. I could feel her heartbeat against mine, quick, uneven, yet full of life. I turned my gaze back to Bran, wanting to express my gratitude, to find the right words, but he was already soaring into the sky, his wings cutting through the morning light, leaving behind something he had finally let go. As I carried her down the hill, silence enveloped us. By the time we reached the cottage, questions began to arise. Aisling didn't look relieved at our return. Instead, she appeared torn. She listened as I shared what I had witnessed and what I believed it meant, but she didn't offer any nods of affirmation. Instead, her focus shifted to Thimble, who was nestled in the blanket. "You realize she will need more than this," she said. "She's formed a bond now. With him, with you. We need to figure out what that means." Ewan, however, was buzzing with excitement. He wanted to go back, to learn more about Bran, to document everything and share it. "It's beyond just instinct," he exclaimed, practically vibrating with energy. "This is a story that people won't believe unless we can show them." But I wasn't convinced that proving anything was the priority. What truly mattered was our next steps. Should we help Thimble fully embrace life in the human world, or let her remain in that unique space where her wild nature and trust had intertwined in a way that felt irreplaceable? Would I be able to keep her, or would I have to let her go once more? In that moment, it hit me. This had evolved beyond merely saving her. It was about deciding what kind of life we were prepared to create for her, and whether I was willing to carry the weight of that decision. The days that followed felt fragile. It wasn't a tense kind of silence, marked by arguments or slammed doors, but a quietness that felt as if something was about to break. We went through our daily routines, feeding Thimble, tending to her wounds, and replacing the soft padding in her crate with fresh wool and fleece. Yet, each small act felt significant, as if we were preparing her for a future we hadn't fully discussed, something none of us wanted to verbalize. Aisling visited every day now, always keeping her professional demeanor. Yet, there was a sense of distance in her body language, as if she had set boundaries and was patiently observing whether I would cross them. "She's healing," she said, her hands gentle but certain while examining Thimble's paw. "But she's different now. I doubt she will ever be the same." Her tone held no judgment. It simply conveyed reality. "You noticed it too, right? Out there with him. That was something unique we can't recreate." I understood her unspoken question. We were all grappling with the same choice. Should we fully welcome Thimble into our lives as a pet, adopt her and raise her as part of our family, or realize that perhaps she belonged to something beyond us? Maybe she still listened for wings in the sky, yearning for her true home. Ewan was pacing the porch, visibly restless. He couldn't grasp our uncertainty. "Why wouldn't we keep her?" he asked. "She's safe here. You love her. She chose you. Why is there even a question?" His conviction was strong, but it came from someone who hadn't yet faced the possibility of letting go of something cherished. I envied his straightforwardness, but at the same time, I worried about the emotional toll it would take when he had to confront that reality. Then there was Tavish, who would usually just shrug or mutter, "Humph." I was taken aback when he stopped by one evening, carrying a bag of dried peat for the fire. He placed it down quietly and said, almost as if to no one in particular, "Some animals, they don't stay tamed. It doesn't mean they won't return." And just like that, he walked away. No further explanation, nothing more to add. Yet his words stirred something within me. That night, as I sat by the hearth with Thimble curled up on my lap, her breaths light and even, I found myself watching the flames as they danced and flickered in the quiet. Outside, the wind sighed through the trees softly. I imagined Bran somewhere out there, overlooking the darkness with those keen, unreadable eyes. "What's best for you?" I whispered to the kitten, not really expecting a reply but feeling the need to voice the question. "Would you prefer to stay here, where it's safe, or would you rather return to a world that few can understand?" Silence greeted me, yet the question weighed heavily on my heart. It seemed to carry a burden heavier than anything I had felt before, because no matter what I decided, there would be a sense of loss, and the only thing more daunting than letting go was the thought of having her choose on my behalf. The situation reached a turning point the next day, though honestly, it had been brewing since the first time I noticed Bran leaning toward Thimble. That soft, churring sound was still echoing in my mind. The cottage felt unusually quiet. Ewan hadn't dropped by, Aisling was running late, and even the wind seemed to still, as if the whole area was holding its breath for what was about to happen. I spent the morning with Thimble resting on my arm. She felt lighter than she should have as I watched her eyes tracking the sunlight moving across the floor. Her paw was getting better. She could put some weight on it now. But there was something different about her gaze. It wasn't dull, just distant, as if she was looking at things beyond the walls of the room. I couldn't help but wonder if this was the first sign of her drifting away, emotionally at least, not physically going anywhere but moving away from me in spirit. When Aisling finally arrived, she lingered by the door before speaking. "I got a call," she informed me. "The rescue center in Glenfinnan has an opening for her. They have experience with cases like hers, animals that are part wild and part domesticated. They can assess her situation and help determine if she should stay with us or go back to the wild." Her words struck me like a sudden chill. It wasn't that they were harsh, but they felt so final. The steadiness in her voice told me the moment had come. No more waiting, no more pretending we could just take things as they came. We needed to decide. Should we bring Thimble fully into our lives, or give her a chance to return to a world that might not accept her, but could still be hers? I focused on the fire. The only sound was the crackling of the pine. My mouth felt dry, and my hands felt unfamiliar. If I let her go, I started, but couldn't finish the thought. I couldn't voice my fear that she might think I abandoned her. Somehow, Aisling understood. She won't think that, she reassured me. Animals remember differently, not in timelines or sentences, but in feelings. Yet those words didn't make it any easier. Later that evening, Ewan came back, eyes wide and breathless. I saw him, he said, panting. Bran, near the ridge again, sitting and watching, his voice caught in his throat. He's waiting. We all stood there in the quiet that followed. The atmosphere in the cottage shifted, not heavier or colder, but filled with an electric tension. It was as if something significant had come into the room with us. Not a force, but a reality we had to face. I glanced down at Thimble, who was focused on the open window, her tail swaying gently and her ears perked up. She didn't seem anxious or scared. She seemed ready. In that moment, I understood something we hadn't explicitly stated but had all sensed. The choice had already been made by her. We were just catching up. The next day, I woke before dawn. The sky was still wrapped in darkness, that heavy, muted feeling just before life begins to stir. I skipped lighting the fire and making tea. Instead, I sat by the window, with Thimble curled up beside me, her breathing soft and steady. The decision hung in the air, present but silent, like a long-held truth that refuses to be overlooked. I gently wrapped her in the scarf I first found her with, still frayed from those uncertain days when I doubted she'd survive the night. She didn't struggle or whine. Instead, she briefly looked up at me with calm eyes and nestled her head against my chest. The path to the ridge felt longer than I remembered, although my boots knew the route well. The grass was damp, and the heather brushed against my legs, reminding me I wasn't alone on this walk. When we reached the final rise, I paused. Bran stood there, not in flight, but tall and poised on the old stone ledge where his nest had once been. Our eyes met, and for a moment, we remained still, the wind stirring and lifting the edge of my scarf as it played with Thimble's fur. I knelt down and carefully unwrapped her. She didn't rush. Instead, she took her time to sniff the air before turning to look at me with a blank expression. Then she walked forward, not hesitantly, but with intention, heading straight toward Bran. He tilted his head slightly. That familiar soft sound, chirr, echoed through the rocks, delicate and unusual. Thimble leaned into him, brushing against his leg before settling beside him, as if she had finally found where she belonged. There were no dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet return to something deep and unspoken. I remained there for a long while, kneeling in the earth, my hands resting idly at my sides. Eventually, Bran took off, not in fear or retreat, but soaring in a wide, graceful arc, circling above me once before disappearing behind the distant cliffs. And there, beneath where he had stood, Thimble stayed, watching. She didn't choose to follow him just yet, and she didn't choose to follow me either. I could see that she didn't belong to one of us, or perhaps she belonged to both of us in a way. I left the scarf on the stone, hoping it might still matter. Then, I turned and began my walk home. I didn't let myself cry until I reached the edge of the pasture, where her paw prints remained in the dirt just outside the cottage door. Weeks have gone by now. The valley is starting to bloom again. The heather covers the hillsides, and the air is shifting from the damp chill of winter to a warmth that feels almost inviting. Here, spring doesn't show up all at once. Instead, it arrives slowly, like forgiveness creeping in. With this gentle change of seasons, I've found my own rhythm once more. It's not the same one I had before Thimble or Bran, but something older and simpler. A rhythm that doesn't demand closure. No one has seen Bran since that day. The locals still speculate. Some say he's moved on, while others claim they've spotted him hunting along the western ridges. I don't feel the need to correct them. I just nod, smile when it feels right, and hold my tongue. Some stories are better kept quiet. Some are too precious to share. Thimble hasn't returned either, but I occasionally notice small signs of her presence. A slight indent in the grass near the stone ledge, the remains of a vole carefully placed outside the barn, or a feather caught in the window frame that clearly belongs to no local bird. That's enough for me. I've come to realize that some connections exist beyond what we can see. Love, in its rarest form, doesn't always return. It simply leaves you changed for the better. Aisling still checks in, though not as frequently. When she does, her tone is softer. Ewan has mentioned writing a paper on everything that happened, but I genuinely hope he doesn't. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about witnessing what unfolds when the lines between grief, instinct, wildness, and tenderness get blurred enough for something extraordinary to emerge. I find myself thinking of Moira more often these days, not in a way that feels empty, but with warmth and presence. Watching Thimble and Bran connect somehow helped me move from dwelling on the past to learning how to carry it with me. I haven't taken a photograph since that day, but I've started sketching again. Small things, quiet scenes, a flicker of wings, a kitten curled up at rest, a cliff touched by dawn. I don't know if I'll ever see them again, or if I should. But every morning, I make sure to leave the window open, just in case. If this story resonated with you, you're certainly not alone. Many of us have experienced deep connections with something wild, or have faced the challenge of letting go when we weren't ready. It's important to remember that while some relationships might not last forever, they can still hold significant meaning in our lives. If you're interested in more stories like this, about resilience, wonder, and the unique connections that shape us, consider subscribing to our channel. You can also click the notification bell and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear about your experience, whether it's a rescue story or one where you felt rescued. And as we reach the end, remember to keep the window open. You never know what might come your way.